What would you do if you were publicly humiliated for what you value most? When flight attendant Melissa approached Jonathan Roumie demanding he hide his crucifix in first class, she didn't expect that her attempt at humiliation would become her own turning point. Why did a 20-minute confrontation on a plane go viral on social media? What happened when other passengers started to pay attention? And what made Melissa call the man she tried to humiliate weeks after losing her job? Discover how a moment of exposed prejudice turned into a spiritual journey neither of them could have foreseen, and why millions of people shared this story of faith, courage, and redemption. The Chicago International Airport pulsed like a living organism that Wednesday afternoon. The wide main concourse, with its arched glass ceiling, housed hundreds of travelers in constant motion. Executives in impeccable suits furiously typed on their smartphones as they hurried along. Families dragged colorful suitcases, some decorated with stickers from exotic destinations, while trying to keep small children nearby. Intermittent announcements echoed from the loudspeakers in different languages, creating a sound layer that blended into the constant hum. Amid all this chaotic hustle, a 51-year-old man stood out, not by drawing attention, but quite the opposite. His unusual calmness created a remarkable contrast with the surrounding environment. It never ceases to amaze me how airports are perfect microcosms of modern society, thought Jonathan, observing a child running in circles, while her mother tried, unsuccessfully, to make her stop. Jonathan Roumie walked with calm, measured steps, as if completely unaware of the collective rush. He wore a navy blue cotton polo shirt, slightly faded at the seams, paired with dark jeans and well-kept casual shoes. A simple brown leather-strap watch adorned his left wrist, and a necklace with a discreet crucifix hung over his chest, usually hidden beneath the shirt, but occasionally visible as he moved. His well-groomed beard framed a face with striking features, with deep brown eyes that conveyed a serenity that was almost unsettling. Nothing in his appearance shouted celebrity or first class. He was just an ordinary man, with modest carry-on luggage and a hardcover book partially visible in the outer pocket of his backpack. "Simplicity is a choice I make every day," murmured Jonathan to himself, adjusting the strap of the backpack on his shoulder. "The world already has enough complications without me adding more." Some people in the terminal cast furtive glances in his direction, their faces showing that peculiar expression of uncertain recognition. A young woman discreetly nudged her friend, leaning over to whisper something in her ear. "Could it be him, the actor from that religious series?" she asked, not trying hard enough to keep her voice low. Her friend shrugged, clearly uninterested. An older businessman adjusted his glasses to get a better look, but soon turned his attention back to his phone screen. To most people who crossed his path, Jonathan was just another anonymous passenger, part of the airport's diverse human landscape. "It's curious how fame is relative," Jonathan reflected, noticing the glances without showing any reaction. "To some, I'm a familiar face. To others, I'm completely invisible. Both perspectives have their value." Following the illuminated signs, Jonathan headed toward the boarding area reserved for first-class passengers. The space was marked off by red velvet ropes and golden signs. The regular line, considerably longer, snaked alongside, full of travelers who repeatedly checked their documents and looked at their watches with anxious expressions. Jonathan approached the counter with the same ease he had shown throughout his passage through the airport, without hesitation, but also without arrogance. He pulled his passport and ticket from the inner pocket of the light jacket draped over his arm and handed the documents to the attendant at the counter. "I always wonder if these divisions are really necessary," Jonathan casually remarked as he approached, his gentle smile directed at the staff member. "But I must admit I do appreciate the extra leg room on long flights." The woman behind the counter, a professional in her early 30s, with brown hair tied in a perfect bun and carefully applied red lipstick, received the documents with hands that had perfectly manicured nails. Her badge identified her as Melissa Dawson, and her navy blue uniform with gold accents was immaculately pressed. Her eyebrows arched slightly as her blue-gray eyes scanned Jonathan from head to toe, evaluating every detail of his casual appearance. Her red lips pressed together slightly as she checked the ticket, a nearly imperceptible gesture that betrayed her doubt. Melissa's perfectly upright posture and precise movements revealed years of training in high-standard customer service. "Sir, this line is exclusively for first-class passengers," said Melissa, her voice melodic yet firm, while her eyes continued to assess Jonathan's casual appearance. "I can direct you to the regular boarding line, which is to your right." Jonathan kept his serene expression unchanged in the face of the attendant's insinuation. His face showed no irritation or offense, just a calmness that seemed almost out of place in the airport's frenetic environment. With a smooth motion, Jonathan pointed to the ticket already in Melissa's hands. The airport's fluorescent lighting gently reflected off the crucifix hanging on his chest, momentarily visible as he leaned slightly forward. His breathing remained steady and deep, in remarkable contrast to the accelerated pace dominating the atmosphere around him. "I'm in the right place," Jonathan replied calmly, his voice low but perfectly audible, with a quality that invited the listener's attention without demanding it. "My ticket is for first class, as you can verify on the document you're holding." Melissa felt a wave of warmth rise from her neck to her cheeks as she examined the ticket with renewed attention. Her long fingers handled the document with professional efficiency, but there was now a subtle tension in her movements. The system confirmed everything printed on the ticket: flight, time, class, seat, and the name Jonathan Roumie appeared clearly on the screen in front of her. Her eyes moved quickly between the document, the computer screen, and the man standing before her. A flash of recognition crossed her gaze when she finally made the connection. She had seen that face before, in posters and trailers for the series The Chosen, where Jonathan played the leading role. Still, even that recognition didn't completely dispel her confusion. "The system has confirmed your information, Mr. Roumie," said Melissa, striving to maintain professionalism in her voice as she returned the documents. "I apologize for the confusion. It's just that our first-class passengers usually have a different presentation." Jonathan received his documents back with a slight nod, showing no resentment for the initial suspicion. His eyes met Melissa's for a brief moment, not as a challenge, but as a recognition of the shared humanity between them. In his 2 decades of artistic career, he had experienced the full range of reactions to his status, from exaggerated adulation to condescending skepticism, and had learned to navigate those waters with grace. His recent success with The Chosen had significantly expanded his public recognition, but Jonathan made a point of maintaining the same habits and values that guided him long before fame. "Appearances rarely tell the whole story, do they?" Jonathan commented with a gentle smile, adjusting the strap of his backpack over his shoulder. "I learned a long time ago that a person's real worth has little to do with what they wear or how they present themselves to the world." Melissa nodded mechanically as she completed the boarding procedure in the system. Her movements were precise, the result of years of training, but there was a stiffness in her gestures that betrayed her ongoing discomfort. Despite the system's confirmation and the belated recognition of Jonathan's identity, something still deeply unsettled her. In her 12 years as a first-class flight attendant, Melissa had developed a set of expectations about how privileged passengers should behave and appear. Jonathan's unassuming presence, with his discreet crucifix and ordinary clothing, represented a small crack in that carefully constructed worldview. "You may proceed to the VIP lounge to your left, Mr. Roumie," Melissa said, handing him the boarding pass with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Boarding for your flight will begin in approximately 45 minutes. I wish you an excellent trip." Jonathan nodded in thanks and moved away from the counter with the same calm demeanor that had characterized him since entering the airport. As he made his way to the indicated VIP lounge, he could feel Melissa's gaze following him, like an invisible radar of judgment and curiosity intertwined. The flight attendant was now speaking to a colleague, leaning slightly and gesturing in Jonathan's direction with insufficient discretion. The colleague glanced briefly toward him, then turned his attention back to Melissa, seemingly more interested in her reaction than in its subject. "It's curious how our prejudices are the lenses through which we view the world," Jonathan reflected as he walked away, adjusting the crucifix under his shirt with an unconscious gesture. "And how we become unsettled when reality refuses to fit those lenses." Upon entering the VIP lounge, Jonathan was greeted by a space radically different from the bustling terminal. The wide, elegantly decorated room in shades of blue and gray offered an oasis of tranquility. Comfortable leather armchairs were strategically positioned, and large glass windows offered a panoramic view of the runways. A discreet buffet presented a selection of gourmet food and an impressive variety of beverages. Jonathan chose a relatively isolated seat near one of the large windows, placed his backpack on the floor, and took out the book he had brought with him. Before opening it, his eyes caught his partial reflection in the window glass. "Sir?" A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. A young staff member was offering a tray of drinks. "Would you like something to drink while you wait for your flight? We have an excellent selection of wines, champagne, or non-alcoholic beverages." Jonathan smiled kindly at the young employee and requested only sparkling water with a slice of lemon. As she walked away, he opened his book but didn't immediately start reading. His thoughts remained on the encounter with Melissa, not out of resentment, but from a genuine curiosity about the nature of human judgment. The small drama he had just experienced was, in many ways, a microcosm of much broader dynamics that permeate society: expectations based on appearances, rigid categories of value and status, the confusion when someone doesn't fit into predefined boxes. "True worth is never on the surface," Jonathan murmured to himself, finally turning his attention to the book in his hands. "And the most dangerous judgments are the ones we make without realizing we're judging." 2 hours had passed since takeoff. The aircraft was cutting through the sky at 35,000 feet, the steady hum of the engines creating a kind of background music. In the first-class cabin, the soft lighting created an atmosphere of tranquil exclusivity. The spacious seats, upholstered in soft cream-colored leather, were occupied by executives working on laptops, a middle-aged couple sleeping with eye masks, and a celebrity discreetly hidden behind dark sunglasses. Jonathan Roumie had reclined his seat slightly, creating a comfortable angle for reading. Between his fingers, the book about Saint Faustina and divine mercy lay open. The crucifix that had previously been hidden beneath his shirt now rested visibly over the blue fabric, glowing gently under the cabin lights. "It's remarkable how the faith of a simple Polish nun could touch so many lives around the world," Jonathan murmured to himself, carefully turning the page. "Maybe that's what frightens people the most. The idea that the extraordinary can emerge from the seemingly ordinary." Melissa had been observing Jonathan intermittently during the first 2 hours of the flight. Their initial interaction at the boarding gate remained alive in her mind, like a small irritation that refused to fade. As she served drinks and meals to the other passengers, her eyes kept drifting toward Jonathan, sitting quietly, immersed in his reading. What had initially been just professional discomfort at an anomaly had now turned into something more personal. It was the crucifix that drew most of her attention. It wasn't particularly large or ornate, but its simple presence, so clearly visible, seemed to her a provocative gesture. After completing the final service round, Melissa discreetly consulted her supervisor, who simply shrugged, seemingly uninterested in the issue. Melissa adjusted her uniform, straightened her posture, and walked with determined steps down the aisle until she stopped beside Jonathan's seat. "I never understood this modern obsession with hiding any sign of faith in public spaces," Melissa thought as she approached, surprised by the intensity of her own reaction. "Why do religious symbols provoke so much discomfort in people, while brand logos are everywhere?" Melissa's shadow fell over the pages of Jonathan's book, interrupting his reading. He slowly looked up, carefully placing a bookmark between the pages before closing the volume. His eyes met Melissa's with a neutral expression, not hostile, but also not particularly welcoming. The flight attendant maintained an almost militarily upright posture, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. Her hands were clasped in front of her body in a gesture intended to appear professional, but which in fact revealed a contained nervousness. "Mr. Roumie, I need to speak with you about a delicate matter," she began, lowering her voice to a tone intended to be confidential, but which only heightened the tension of the moment. "Some passengers have commented on the display of religious symbols. We have neutrality policies in the cabin." Jonathan closed the book completely and placed it on the armrest of his seat, his movements deliberately slow. His face, which moments earlier bore the focused serenity of an absorbed reader, now showed an intensified attentiveness. There was no anger in his expression, not even irritation, only a sharp curiosity, the kind of gaze that seemed to see beyond spoken words. He adjusted in his seat, turning slightly to face Melissa directly. The crucifix on his neck briefly glinted as he moved, silently underlining the topic of the conversation. "Religious symbols?" he asked, his voice calm and low, but perfectly audible. A simple question that, in its brevity, invited Melissa to elaborate. "Could you clarify which specific symbols you're referring to, and what exactly the airline's policy is regarding them?" Melissa felt the heat rise from her neck to her cheeks. The eyes of a few nearby passengers had discreetly turned in their direction, drawn by the tone of the conversation. She realized she was on shaky ground. There were no actual formal complaints from other passengers, nor a specific airline policy on discrete religious symbols. Her discomfort was personal, something that had been growing since their first encounter at the boarding gate. Her fingers nervously adjusted the airline's golden pin on her uniform, an unconscious gesture betraying her growing insecurity. "Your crucifix and the rosary I saw in your hand earlier," she replied, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the increasing sense that she had made a misjudgment. "Nothing personal, but we ask for discretion to maintain a comfortable environment for all passengers. Some may feel uncomfortable with explicit religious displays during the flight." A glimmer of understanding crossed Jonathan's eyes. He leaned slightly forward in his seat, reducing the physical distance between them without invading Melissa's personal space. His hands rested calmly on his knees, shoulders relaxed despite the growing tension in the conversation. The contrast between his calm demeanor and Melissa's increasingly visible nervousness couldn't have been starker. Jonathan seemed completely present in the moment, fully aware of the deeper meaning behind this small confrontation. "Interesting," Jonathan said, leaning forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Melissa's. "Which passengers complained exactly? Could you point out who felt disturbed by a symbol that is barely visible from more than a meter away?" The direct question caught Melissa off guard. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps even reluctant compliance. The typical reactions she encountered when exercising her authority as a flight attendant. Jonathan's calm confrontation, his refusal to simply accept the premise of her request, shook the mental script she had prepared. Her eyes briefly scanned the cabin, as if searching for allies or, more precisely, for the imaginary complaints she had invoked. "Well, it's a general policy." Melissa hesitated, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "We tried to maintain a neutral and inclusive environment for all passengers, regardless of their beliefs or backgrounds." A slight smile appeared at the corner of Jonathan's lips, not a smile of triumph or mockery, but of recognition. With those few hesitant words, Melissa had inadvertently revealed the truth. There was no policy, no complaints from other passengers. Jonathan took a deep breath, a gesture that seemed not only to oxygenate his lungs, but to give space to the words that would follow. "So no one complained," he stated, not asked. "You simply decided that my faith is bothersome. What I wonder is, why? What is it about a small symbol of my personal journey that triggered this reaction in you?" Jonathan's calm tone stood in stark contrast to the increasing tension emanating from Melissa. The professional mask she had worn through years of service was beginning to show visible cracks. Her hands, previously clasped firmly in front of her body, now moved nervously, adjusting her uniform sleeve, touching the pearl necklace she wore. Other passengers in the cabin, realizing something unusual was happening, began to pay closer attention to the interaction. A businessman 2 seats ahead discreetly removed his headphones. An elderly woman across the aisle closed her magazine, her curious eyes watching the scene. "It's not about your faith, it's about harmonious coexistence," Melissa insisted, her voice now slightly louder than she intended, betraying her growing inner agitation. "In a shared space like this, we need to consider everyone's comfort and sensitivities." Jonathan kept his gaze steady but non-confrontational. There was something in his posture that suggested this wasn't the first time he faced such a situation. Unhurriedly, he let his right hand lightly touch the crucifix hanging from his neck, not as a gesture of defiance, but as a reminder to himself of the personal meaning of that symbol. The silence in the cabin had intensified. Now nearly all the awake passengers were discreetly paying attention to the conversation. If it were a necklace with a peace symbol, a Star of David, or an Islamic crescent, would you ask someone to hide it? Jonathan asked, his voice gentle but piercing, posing a question that went straight to the heart of the matter. Or is it only the Christian cross that poses a problem for this neutrality policy you mentioned? The question hung in the air, like a challenge impossible to ignore. Melissa opened and closed her mouth, words forming and dissolving before they could be spoken. Her extensive training as a flight attendant had not prepared her for this kind of philosophical confrontation mid-flight. The automatic responses and stock phrases she normally used to deal with difficult situations now seemed inadequate, almost childish in the face of Jonathan's clear and direct question. We, that's not, Melissa stammered, unable to formulate a coherent answer in the face of the contradiction Jonathan had so effectively exposed. That's not the issue. Jonathan noticed the genuine vulnerability now emanating from Melissa. Behind the professional facade and the impeccable uniform was a real person, confronting something uncomfortable within herself. When he spoke again, his voice had softened even further, becoming almost confidential, as if the conversation were just between the two of them, despite the growing attention of the other passengers. These symbols have accompanied me for decades, Jonathan continued, his voice filling the space without altering, carrying a quiet intensity that held attention. They sustained me when I didn't even have money to eat, when I knelt in total despair before God. They're not accessories I put on and take off depending on social convenience. They are outward manifestations of something deeply personal and essential to who I am. I won't hide them to satisfy someone's prejudice. An absolute silence fell over the cabin, as if the very air had momentarily paused. The passengers, who had previously only peeked discreetly, were now openly observing. Jonathan's words, spoken without anger but with unwavering conviction, had turned that small confrontation into something greater. Melissa's reaction was physical before verbal. A step backward, as if the words had created a tangible force that pushed her. Her hands trembled slightly, and the professional mask that had sustained her initial confrontation was now completely shattered. I apologize, Melissa finally said, her voice almost a whisper, unrecognizable compared to the authoritative tone she had used at first. You're right. There were no complaints. It was my own personal reaction that shouldn't have affected my professionalism. 3 weeks had passed since the incident on the plane. Melissa's apartment, located on the 10th floor of a modern building in the suburbs of Chicago, was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the large living room windows. The space, decorated with minimalist furniture in neutral tones, reflected the organized and practical personality Melissa had always cultivated. But something had changed. The walls, once adorned only with carefully selected abstract art, now also displayed a small carved wooden cross, discreetly placed near the bookshelf. Melissa was sitting on her beige leather sofa, no longer wearing the navy blue uniform with gold details that had been an integral part of her identity for over a decade. Instead, she wore gray sweatpants and a simple t-shirt, a look she would have once considered inappropriately casual just a month ago. Who would have thought I'd feel more authentic without that uniform? Melissa murmured to herself, absent-mindedly running her fingers along the edge of the book in front of her. 12 years building an identity based on appearances, and a 20-minute encounter was enough to bring it all down. In front of her, on the glass coffee table, was a copy of the Diary of St. Faustina, the same book Jonathan had been reading during that fateful flight. The edges of the pages already showed signs of frequent use, with small colored markers pointing to passages that had touched Melissa in a special way. Next to the book rested a Divine Mercy rosary, its red and blue beads softly glistening under the ambient light. She had purchased the religious item the previous week after extensively researching the devotion that had captured her attention so unexpectedly. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same religious symbol that had disturbed her enough to confront a passenger now held a place of prominence in her own home. The rosary wasn't just a decorative object. The wear on the beads revealed that Melissa had been using it regularly in recent days. How could I have spent so much time judging others' faith when I never had the courage to explore my own spirituality? She reflected, gently touching the beads of the rosary. Maybe what bothered me most about Jonathan was precisely the peace I secretly wished for myself. The video of the confrontation on the plane had spread quickly across social media. Someone had discreetly recorded it with a cell phone, and within hours, millions of people around the world had watched the moment Melissa asked Jonathan to hide his religious symbols, and the eloquent and serene response he gave. The airline, pressured by the negative backlash, had initially defended Melissa publicly, citing misunderstandings about internal policies. But the narrative quickly shifted when other passengers from that flight came forward to confirm that there was no policy against discrete religious symbols. 3 days after the incident, before any official disciplinary action could be taken, Melissa had submitted her resignation letter. But contrary to what many assumed, her decision had not been driven by the shame of public consequences or fear of professional retaliation. Her departure from the airline was the result of something much deeper, a personal transformation that made it impossible to continue living and working as before. People think I left because of shame, but the truth is I left because I finally saw things clearly, Melissa said aloud, as if testing the truth of those words by hearing them spoken. How can you keep playing a role once you finally realize that's all it is? A role that doesn't reflect who you really are or want to be? Melissa rose from the couch with a determined motion and walked over to the small table where her cell phone was charging. Her steps were different now, less rigid, less calculated. Even her posture had subtly changed over the past few weeks, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She picked up the phone and returned to the couch, holding it for a few moments as she contemplated what she was about to do. The number was saved in her contacts. She had gotten it through a colleague at the airline who knew Jonathan's agent. In recent days, she had mentally rehearsed this call countless times, preparing words and explanations. But now at the moment of truth, all the carefully crafted phrases seemed inadequate. With a deep breath that carried the courage of the truly vulnerable, Melissa finally dialed the number. Will he recognize me? Or worse, will he think I'm calling to stir up more trouble? Melissa wondered as the phone rang, her heart pounding with each ring. No, I need to trust that he'll hear the sincerity in my words, just like I saw the authenticity in his that day. After 4 rings, the call was answered. On the other end, Jonathan's voice sounded exactly as Melissa remembered, calm, centered, with that resonant quality that seemed to reach beyond the ears. Jonathan? It's Melissa from the flight, she began, her voice slightly trembling. I know it might seem strange that I'm calling, but… Melissa! How are you? Jonathan interrupted, his voice filled with genuine warmth that caught Melissa by surprise. There was no caution in his tone, no defensiveness she might have expected. Instead, there was sincere joy, as if he were receiving a call from an old friend. Different, completely different, Melissa replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over her body at Jonathan's receptiveness. She took a deep breath, searching for the right words to express the profound transformation that had taken place in her life. I started reading about your faith, about divine mercy. I had never truly understood what it meant to have something that sustains you in your darkest moments. And now you understand? Jonathan asked gently, with no rush or judgment, only genuine interest in her journey. The question hung in the air for a few seconds as Melissa considered her response. The past 3 weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, from public humiliation to deep introspection, from defensive anger to humble acceptance, from existential questioning to brief glimpses of a peace she had never known before. When she finally replied, her words came slowly, weighted with the truth she had recently uncovered. Now I understand that what I showed wasn't professionalism. It was fear. Fear of everything I couldn't control or comprehend, Melissa confessed, feeling a vulnerability that she once would have considered unbearable, but now embraced as a necessary part of her growth. You weren't displaying religious symbols. You were simply being who you are. Jonathan was silent for a moment, not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind of respectful pause that honors the importance of what was shared. Melissa could almost picture him on the other end of the line, nodding thoughtfully, giving her words the space and consideration they deserved. Thank you for calling, Melissa. It takes courage to recognize that, he finally replied, his voice conveying genuine respect for her journey. Few people have the inner honesty to face their own prejudices like that. Melissa felt her eyes well up with tears, not of sadness, but of deep relief that comes with authenticity. For so long she had lived within the rigid confines of expectations, her own and others. The impeccable uniform, the perfect posture, the professional smile carefully calibrated to be welcoming without being intimate. All those things had been armor that protected her, but also imprisoned her. Now, even through a simple phone call, she was experiencing the freedom that comes from showing up truthfully, without masks or pretense. "Can I ask you something? How do you stay so serene even when you're under attack?" Melissa asked, her genuine curiosity replacing the defensiveness that had once characterized her interactions. "That day on the plane, you had every right to be furious with me, to report me to the airline, to make a scene. But you did none of that." Jonathan's answer came without hesitation, as if the question touched something he had deeply contemplated throughout his own spiritual journey. "Because I've learned that true peace doesn't come from hiding who we are, but from fully accepting who God has called us to be. Even when that makes others uncomfortable," Jonathan explained, his words simple yet filled with lived wisdom. "When you find your center, external storms lose much of their power over you." After ending the call, Melissa remained seated in silence for a few minutes, letting the conversation resonate within her. Then, with a deliberate motion, she picked up the rosary that rested on the table. The beads slid gently through her fingers, a rhythm that, though new to her, was already beginning to feel familiar, almost as if her body remembered a movement her conscious mind had forgotten. For the first time in years, perhaps the first time since childhood, Melissa prayed. It wasn't a prayer asking for anything, not even forgiveness or guidance. It was simply a silent thank you for having found something greater than her own fears and prejudices, something that invited her to expand beyond the self-imposed limits that had defined her existence for so long. "Who would have thought that my greatest moment of professional shame would become my greatest opportunity for personal growth?" Melissa thought, feeling a lightness that defied common logic. Sometimes we have to lose everything we thought mattered to discover what truly does. The former flight attendant looked at the book about St. Faustina and at the rosary in her hands, symbols of a journey that was only just beginning. The sun was setting on the Chicago skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as the first stars began to appear. Melissa had discovered, through circumstances she never would have chosen or foreseen, that true transformation doesn't happen when we hide our differences, but when we learn to honor them, in others and in ourselves. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unanswered questions and challenges yet to be faced. But for the first time in a long time, the uncertainty didn't terrify her. There was a new confidence in her steps, not the rigid confidence of perfection, but the flexible confidence of someone who knows she can fall, rise, learn, and grow. Maybe true freedom isn't the absence of limitations, but the courage to be authentically yourself within them, Melissa reflected, putting away the rosary and rising to close the curtains as night fell over the city. And maybe the greatest proof of faith isn't aggressively defending your beliefs, but living them so naturally that they become inseparable from who you are. If the story of Jonathan Roumie and Melissa touched your heart and showed how a moment of confrontation can turn into a journey of spiritual discovery, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Tell us in the comments, have you ever faced prejudice because of your faith? Or maybe you judged someone and later deeply regretted it. Your experiences can inspire others who are going through similar situations. Remember, sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest blessings. Until the next video, and may divine mercy be with you.